Hi everybody, it's Bouquet Perry from Tampa, Florida, and today we are going to take a look at the Viltrox 56mm f1.4 lens for Fuji. I'm going to break it down, we're going to look at images, we're going to talk about sharpness, value, build construction, all the things you talk about when you are normally looking at a new lens, and ultimately I'll tell you whether or not I'm going to keep this lens in my kit. So stick around. Just a quick reminder to check out my podcast. It's available anywhere that podcasts are found. It's called Photobomb. And join my group on Facebook. It's called Pro Photo Talk with Bouquet Perry. Also, give us a like and give us a comment and tell me why I'm wrong and tell me why I'm right and get involved in the community because the photography community is a fantastic community to be involved with. And the Fuji community especially is very welcome and opening to new people. So, get involved. Ask questions. Become part of the group. You'll be glad that you did. All right, so first thing we have to talk about is why. Why would you want this lens, this 1.4 lens from Viltrox? First of all, it's not a Fuji lens, and many people flat refuse to get a lens that is built by an outside manufacturer. I shot Canon for many years. I tried several different camera lenses for my Canon. I started with Tamrons and moved to Sigma. Then eventually I moved to Canon L series glass, and I never looked back. It was the best glass that you could put on a Canon lens. But when I switched to Fuji last year, I started to look at some of the options for Fuji lenses. And one of the things that I discovered was that this company, Viltrox, is making some pretty impressive lenses at an unbelievably impressive price. So right now, I'm shooting my Fujis with two main lenses. I'm using the 18 to 55, probably my main go-to walk-around lens. And then I'm also using the long lens, the 70 to 200 millimeter equivalent. I'm still not used to the numbers on the lenses. What is it? What's the 70 to 200? I'm going to put it right here. I'm still not used to that. I still think in terms of shooting with a full frame camera. I'm still trying to figure out the numbers. The thing is that I shoot a lot of headshots, do stuff on location and etc. And when I shoot headshots with my Canon camera and my Canon lenses and my full frame body, I would always shoot at f4. F4 was where I wanted to be. Well, because you're using an APS-C sensor when you're using a Fuji camera, f4 is not going to give you the same depth of field. It's not going to be as shallow. The bokeh is not going to be as blurry in the background. So you have to go to a lower aperture. And I found myself shooting at f2.8, which is fine, except that's it. f2.8 is the wall. You can't get any more open than f2.8 on Fuji lenses that are zoom lenses. So, I guess it's okay, right? Do I need to go below f2.8? I don't think I necessarily do, but there's just a part of me that wants to go. You want that option. The speedometer in your car goes up to 160, and you're never going to drive 160, but you kind of like that it goes up to 160, and you could go there if you wanted to. Well, it's kind of like that. So I just couldn't resist taking a look at these Viltrox lenses because they're so inexpensive to see if it was worth having one of these in my kit that would give me the ability to go to 1.4. All right, so let's take a look at some of the options that you have if you're looking at getting a prime lens in or close to this range for a Fuji camera. If you go shopping for a nice wide prime for Fuji, you're going to first look at the Fuji lenses that are available. And the thing is that Fuji makes a 56mm. They make a 56mm f1.2. This is 1.4. So you can actually get another third of a stop wide with the Fuji 56mm f1.2. And if you look at the reviews for that lens, you're going to find that people just love it. A lot of Fuji shooters who have been shooting for years, they love this lens, but it isn't without reservations. They will talk about how that lens doesn't focus as fast as, say, the Viltrox focuses. You really get the impression when you look at the reviews for that lens that it's due for an update, right? That Fuji is due to put out a new version of that lens. And that lens costs $1,000. That's what it costs today, new. They also make a couple of 50mm lenses. You can get the Fuji 50mm f2, the Fuji 50mm f2, which is not as wide as 1.4, so you get one stop less with that one, and it costs $500, but $500 is a great price. But the Viltrox costs $330, right? So $330 for 1.4 versus $500 for 2.0. So it's cheaper by $170 and it's an extra stop of light. So it's really a no-brainer as to why you would want to take a look at this lens if you are looking for a fast prime lens for a Fuji camera somewhere in the 50 to 56 millimeter range, which is going to put you in the 70 to 85 millimeter range equivalent. And for a lot of people, 85 millimeters is exactly where they want to be for portraits. People just love that range for portraits, and I'm a big fan of that range as well, which is why I was looking at this lens. All right, so let's take a look at this lens. Let's talk about build quality and first impressions. So the first thing you're going to notice when you take this lens out of the box is that it's not big. It's not a big lens at all. If you take a look at the 24 to 70, right? This is not a big lens. This is a small lens, light, and it's very well made. I mean, I can't say what the inside is like. I didn't take it apart. But the outside is great. It's all metal construction. It's got a little heft in the hand. You know, it's light, but it's not light like a plastic lens like the Nifty 50 that you get. You know, Canon has this 50 millimeter lens that you can get, and it's plastic and it's really cheap, and people love it, but you don't feel it's plastic, you know. This has got heft to it. This is a metal construction. Even the lens hood is metal, right? I think. Is it metal? I can't bend it. It's either metal or the strongest plastic I've ever felt in my life. So even the lens hood is metal, which is very, very cool. And this is what it looks like with the lens hood on. So you definitely feel like there's good construction in this lens, better construction than you would expect for this price point. Also, a really cool thing that Viltrox has done is that there is a port right here. See it? See the, where is it? Right there. See the port? You can plug this into your computer and update it. In fact, it needed to be updated when I bought it to the new software. It doesn't come with a cord. You have to have your own cord, but I mean, who doesn't have cords? So you take the cord, you plug it in your computer, you download the latest update for the lens from Viltrox's website, and then you open up the lens just like you would open up a hard drive, and you drag and drop the update onto the lens, it updates, and you're good to go. It was absolutely seamless and easy, and it worked perfectly. So I was very happy with the way that the lens updated. So before we start looking at some pictures and picking apart the images for this lens, let's just go ahead and break down real quick so we have in our mind what the pros and the cons are so far. Pro is that the construction is good. It's light, it's small. It shoots at 1.4, which is 2 stops wider than any zoom lens that you can get for pretty much any camera on the planet. And finally, price. You just can't deny the price. At $330, well, $329. At $330, you can't deny that price is a major pro. One of the things that I find is interesting is that when you were looking at other reviews of this lens, photographers so often when they're reviewing the lens, they'll say, if you're trying to think of a lens, they'll say, well, if price is a factor, when is price not a factor? For many people, price is the single most important factor. I mean, it's wonderful to live in a world where we're just all about the purity of things and saying, you know, well, by far the best car is a Porsche. But we can't all go out and buy Porsches, right? Price is a factor. It's always about buying the best quality item for the price that we can afford, or getting the best value for your money. So price is a big, big pro when you're talking about any piece of equipment, and especially when you're talking about this lens, because nobody can beat this when it comes to price. Now, what about the cons? What's bad? Well, these are nitpicky, but they're kind of annoying. The aperture ring doesn't have any clicks. Okay, it's smooth scrolling. So you won't really know what aperture you're in unless you're looking through the viewfinder or you're looking at the back of the camera. I mean, you can look here at the numbers if you want, but you better have your reading glasses on. So what you're going to do is you're going to look through the viewfinder. If you're at 2.8 and you want to drop down by third stop increments, you're going to have to look through your viewfinder as you do that. Whereas if you're using a Fuji camera or a Fuji lens, you can just go click, 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 and third. Right? With this lens, that's not the case. With this lens, you're about to actually look at the numbers as you do it. That's kind of annoying. Another thing that's annoying is that if you look right here, it's got ridges on the ring, right? But there are no ridges where the numbers are. And the numbers are on top. So when you're looking through the camera lens, right? And let me do this real quick. when you're looking through the camera lens and you reach up there to change this, your thumb falls right on the numbers and there's no ridge there. And so you don't have anything to pull. So whenever you want to change, you've got to remember to go here and change it from here. Whereas if you're a person who does this, this is a problem. If you're a person who does this is a problem. So it'd be nice if the numbers if the ring was a little bigger and there were ridges on the numbers or by the numbers, so you could just grab the camera anyway and you could change it. And it's kind of annoying. You go up to change, you go, oh, okay, wait, where's the ridges? You got to find the ridges, which is not something you want to have to do. So that's kind of annoying. And I don't understand this at all, but the end cap that comes with the camera and fits on the camera just fine, if you put it onto another Fuji lens, look, that's on. And now I'm just going to grab, well, I think I made my point. The end cap that comes with this lens does not stick to a Fuji lens. And a Fuji lens end cap does not stick to this lens, which I don't understand. They're the same mount, right? They're the same exact mount. They both have to fit on the same camera, and they do. So why wouldn't the caps be the same? I never had this happen with my Canons. Any cap fit, right? And that's annoying because if you're swapping lenses, you just want to take the cap from one and put it on the other, and they won't work. So you have to have a dedicated cap just for that lens. It's a minor annoyance, but it can kind of be. It's just frustrating. Like why would they do that? I mean, that just seems so silly. But there it is. So that's one of the cons of the lens as well. And of course, another of the cons may well be some of the stuff we're going to look at right now. So let's stop talking and let's start looking. Let's take a look at some images and some test images that I did with this lens. Let's take this step by step. Let's look at some images and talk about each aspect of this lens, and then we can decide if it's a lens that's worth having. If it's worth $330 to put this lens in your kit, if you're going to use it, and if it gives you good value for the money. So the first thing we have to talk about is the bokeh. Bokeh is very important. When you're buying a lens and you're getting a super wide prime, one of the things, well, maybe for many people, the only reason they're doing it is that they want that great bokeh. They want that really soft background, the shallow depth of field. So here we go. This is the Viltrox at 1.4, and this is the Viltrox at 2.8. So there is just no doubt. Yeah, I mean, you knew this was coming. This is not really much of a test, but the difference between this and this is huge, right? It's just huge. And then here, if you're curious, by the way, this is my 24 to 70 equivalent, which would be the 16 to 55 millimeter Fuji lens. This is the bokeh at 2.8 with the Fuji. So right now, the camera that I have, the lens that I have in my kit, this is the best I can do. This is the most shallow I can get with my kit right now. But with the Viltrox, I can do that, right? Nice. Which brings us to the next question about the bokeh, and that is, what kind of bokeh is it? Because this is also important to a lot of people. So here's a good shot at 1.4 to give you an idea just how blurry it gets and how soft it gets in the background. And this is just beautiful. But is it good bokeh? What do the lens flares look like? What do the light flares look like? Are they round? Are they oval? What do they look like? Well, here's the thing. I don't really care. I really don't. I know that there are people who do deep dives into exactly what the bokeh looks like. And listen, I appreciate that. Great. There's things I care about that other people don't care about. But for me, as long as it's super soft, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time analyzing the bokeh because I know my clients don't analyze the bokeh. That's the sort of thing that only photographers care about. All they know is that they pop out more because the background is soft. So I'm not really worried about that, but I mean, I just don't see a problem with this, right? Looks fine. Looks beautiful. Okay, next question. What's it look like with a deep field? In other words, when you've got a background that's really, really deep behind your subject, what's that bokeh look like? So here we are. This is 1.4, and this is 2.8. So it's a huge difference. You can see it really isolates your subject a lot when you go from 2.8 to 1.4. And that brings us to the next thing, and that is purple fringing. This lens at 1.4 is going to give you some serious purple fringing. So let's zoom in on the number 2. This is what I was focused on, and we're now at 100%. Do you see the purple fringing on the 2? Now, you may be like me, and you may not really see it. You may be going, I guess, maybe, or because you think maybe that's in the color of the mailbox, and I'm not sure. Okay, so now I'm going to take the same lens to 2.8 and watch. Now do you see it? Now do you see how there's no purple outline around the 2 anymore? Now here we go, back to 1.4. Wow, right? Wow, serious purple fringing around the 2. Now, you can remove some of that with software. Right over here, you can see we've got, where are we at? Purple fringing right there. So you can defringe, which takes some of the purple down. And there's other ways to get it down. But there is no doubt, if you are shooting at 1.4, you're going to get some purple fringing. But if you go to 2.8, you're not. So it's really only at 1.4. It's really only at the widest aperture. And you're going to find that as we look at the different qualities of this lens, that all of the problems happen at 1.4. That you're really golden until you get to 1.4. At 2.0, you're still pretty good. But once you get to 1.4, that's when you're going to start to see fringing. And that's when you're going to start to see some softening in your focus, which you can see right here in this picture. But we're also going to take a look at it in more detail right here. So one of the reasons I would get a lens like this is for detail shots at weddings. Right? Close-ups of rings and close-ups of the garter and things like that. You make that background super blurry, really makes it stand out. It's soft. People really like it. So I would want to use this lens for that sort of work. So is it good for that sort of work? Well, let's zoom in. So here we go. Now let me make sure I don't have anything turned on this one. I don't. So here we go. This is the lens. This is at 50% and this is at 100. Yeah, you know, that's kind of soft. So let's go to 2.8 and take a look at it. Wow, what a difference. This is 2.8 and this is 1.4. It's much, much softer. 2.8, right, much softer. And here's another thing I noticed. If I put my 16 to 55 on there, my 16 to 55, the focus distance is much shorter. Like you can only get about 22 inches away from the ring when you're using this lens. But if you're using this lens, you can get 11 inches away. It's half the distance. And the closer you are to a subject, the more shallow your depth of field is. So you get an even better depth of field with this lens than you do with this lens because you can get close. I mean, you get a more shallow depth of field with this lens, but it's not as shallow as it could be. If they were both being shot from the same distance, then this would be 2 stops more shallow. But because you can get this half again closer, it's not going to be 2 stops more shallow. Does that make sense? Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. I actually had to move the tripod and the angle of attack in order to use this lens and get it close enough to shoot this shot. So if you look here at the bokeh, it's more shallow in comparison to this. To this than it would be otherwise because I can get this lens closer. You know, this is the full-size image from the Viltrox, and then with the 16 to 55, this is the full-size image. You can see I can get much closer. And of course, it's going to be sharper. Still not as shallow though, right? Still not as shallow as you're going to see here. But is it usable? Is this usable? Yeah, when you look at when you compare it to 2.8, you think, well, maybe not. But let's just go over here and let's just create a brush real quick like, and let's just put a little mask right here. There we go. And then let's go down to sharpness and crank it up. Now, is it sharp enough now? Well, sure. That's sharp enough compared to, say, this one. This is 2.8, and this is 1.4. Yeah, that's right. Look at that image. Look at that image. Would you look at this image and be like, "Oh, the ring's not sharp"? No, you'd be fine with it. And look at the bokeh here compared to here. Now, where you're really going to see a problem with this lens when it comes to sharpness is in the edges and the corners. Again, I'm not really worried about that. If you're shooting landscapes, this is going to be very important to you. First of all, if you're shooting landscapes at 1.4, that's a little interesting. But maybe you're shooting night scenes. I don't know. But that's where you're going to see it with any lens, especially a wide lens. That's where you see problems, is in the corners where you're going to see the problems the most. But for me and for my uses, if I'm shooting at 1.4, it's because I want 1.4 to be sharp and I don't want anything else to be sharp. So I don't have a problem with that. You know, to each his own. Right? How's it going to work? So the bottom line is, if you want to get this super soft bokeh with this lens and you want to shoot close-up stuff, absolutely, all it takes is a little after sharpening and you're going to be just fine. But it's not going to be as good as 2.8. 2.8 is always going to be sharper with this lens or any lens. All right, so let's take a look at the next thing. One of the other reasons you buy a lens like this is because you want to use it in low light. I do a lot of weddings and bar mitzvahs, and so I'm shooting in dark rooms, and you want to be able to shoot in super low light. So here is where the lens is really going to shine for you, because it's not about focus, it's not about bokeh, it's not about purple fringing, it's about how much light can you get in your camera. And you can get 4 times as much light in your camera with this lens. Now, I'm not going to show you pictures that I shot in super low light to show you can get more light in, because that's just obvious and that works. What we are going to talk about is grain. We're going to talk about noise, because this is where it really comes into play, and where it's really important when you're talking about a Fuji camera, because Fuji cameras use APS-C sensors, which means they are going to be more noisy than a full frame, which is where I'm coming from, and so it's a concern of mine. So I let the camera do its thing here. So here we are shooting with the 1.4. We're with the 1.4, aren't we? Yeah, 1.4, the 56mm 1.4. And here's the same shot done with the 56mm at 2.8. Now look at your ISO. I can do this shot at 640 at 1.4, but if I jump to 2.8, which is what I have now on my camera, we're now at 2500. What's the difference going to look like in the background? That's where it really makes a difference. So let's zoom into full size on the background. See this grain? See this noise here? Now go to 1.4 and see what you get. Wow. Right, that's a huge difference. The difference between 640 and 2500 ISO is a very visible grain. Now, just like before, when you're talking about focus, this isn't what you're going to be shooting this picture. You're not going to be enlarging this picture this way. It's only going to look like this when it's in an album or something like that. But still, even here, you can see much softer background, much less grain. And you can also see, look at the corners. See the vignetting coming in here? See the vignetting? This is another problem that you have with really wide open 1.4, 1.2 lenses, is you get this vignetting in the corners. But here's the thing, I like the vignetting in the corners. I tend to vignette all of my pictures in the corners. So that's not a problem for me either. Might be a problem for you, but it's not a problem for me. Now where you're really going to see a difference is where you go someplace where there's really an absence of light. So here we are at 1600. 1600, 100%. Now, let's do the same thing at 1.4. This is at 2.8. Let's go to 1.4. Oh, I'm sorry. I was backwards. This is 2.8. This is 2.8. And this is 1.4. Now, you see there's a lot. Oh, look at the grain here. 2.8, 1.4. So you're really going to see a big difference in the grain. And what does this mean? It means that if you're in a location where, let's say you don't like to shoot above 3600 ISO, with this lens, you can shoot not only at 6400 ISO, but you can shoot at 128,000 ISO. And you will get the same grain as you got at 3200. Why? Because you're not really going to shoot at 128,000 ISO. You're going to shoot at 64. You're going to shoot at 3600 ISO. Because 3600 ISO with this lens at 1.4 is the same as 168,000 ISO with an f2.8 lens. I hope I didn't mess that up in my explanation, but it's very important to realize. You gain 2 stops of light, which means whatever your top end is with your ISO, say I won't shoot over 6400 ISO because I don't like the grain, take that 2 more stops. That's the equivalent of what you can do with this lens because of those 2 stops. And for my money, this alone probably makes it worth the price of admission. To be able to basically add 2 more stops of ISO onto your camera without having 2 more stops of grain, that's huge. All right, so now I managed to pull in the world's sexiest model. He was very busy, and I had to schedule it 2 weeks in advance. But he came in, and he sat for me for a few pictures because I need to look at what it does with people. I need to look at if it's sharp enough when you're focusing on a person. So here we go. I shot this at 1.4. Look at that background. Look how soft it is. Now look at the background at 2.8. right? Here, it just makes everything disappear. It's all still there, but it's just a wash of color, like a background should be. Whereas here, that's an extension cord right there. There's no doubt that's an extension cord. Here, wash of color. Could be an extension cord, could be a towel, could be an orange mop. We don't know. So it's a big difference. But what about the focus? Well, let's take a look at the eye. This is my eye at 100%, and here it is at 2.8. There is no doubt. Look at this area here, right? Everything around my eye is sharply in focus at 2.8, and my eye is sharply in focus. And if you go to 1.4, now you can see softer all around my eyes, softer in the eyebrows, softer in the eye. So you've got to know if you're going to get this lens, you are not going to get the sharpness at 1.4 that you get with your current 2.8 lens, or even with this lens at 2.8. But the question is it sharp enough? Is it sharp enough? Well, I think it is. Oh, I'm sorry. This is f2. I've been saying this is 2.8. This is f2. This is 2.8. Super sharp. But again, look at the bokeh. This is the 2.8 bokeh, and this is the 1.4. Bokeh. I'm sorry. This is the bokeh at 1.4, and this is the bokeh at 2.8. So you're going to trade off this soft background. You're going to get the soft background, but you're also going to get a little softness in the focus. Can you live with it? Well, you tell me. I shot this at 1.4. Do you see a problem with it? Do you look at this picture and think, oh, her eyes aren't sharp enough? No. Her eyes look just fine. Let's go in and take a look. Here we go. That's her eye. And you can see it's pretty soft around here because I'm at 1.4. But again, all I've got to do is pop over to here, give myself a little brush, give myself a little mask right there, and then go down to sharpening and bring it up. And now, see how sharp that eye is? Here's the other thing, though. Do you really want to be shooting close-in portraits with 1.4? Because this eye is definitely more soft than this eye. And it's because when you're shooting at 1.4, your depth of field is so small. So I guess one of the things I had to really think about the more I worked with this lens was I wanted this 1.4 so I could shoot these super shallow headshots. And then I realized I don't think I can use this lens at 1.4 to shoot super shallow headshots because the other eye is almost always going to be out of focus. Unless they are dead on to the camera, the other eye is going to be softer. 1.4 is so shallow. So I'm probably going to shoot maximum 2.0 if I'm going to use this for a headshot. Or I might just shoot at 2.8, which is what I do now. And if I'm going to shoot at 2.8, why do I even need this lens? Well, there's other qualities that this lens has, right? Let me kick out of this and we'll talk about the qualities a little bit more. If it seems like I'm a little befuddled and all over the place when I talk about this lens, well, it's because I kind of am. There are so many factors that go into picking a lens and so many factors that go into reviewing a lens, and I'm not the world's greatest reviewer when it comes to equipment. There are people out there who will break down everything in the raw numbers and just so meticulous about it and give you a great review. And I tend to be a little bit more organic. I want to talk about what this lens can do for me and if it's practical and if it's got good value. And it's tough when you're evaluating a lens like this because there are so many pros and cons. So let's try and just kind of put it all together now into a nice package where we can make a decision about it. First of all, what are your options? Well, you can get the Fuji f1.2. The Fuji f1.2 is going to be wider, but and it's going to be wider this lens. Oh, and it's going to deal with chromatic aberration better. It's going to deal with purple fringing better, and it is loved by many Fuji shooters. The downside is that it doesn't focus as fast. The people say they have focusing problems with it, and it is $1,000 versus $330. If I was a prime shooter and all I did was shoot prime, and all I did was shoot portraits, never events, then yeah, I would probably want to look at that lens. $1,000 for your main lens, one of your main lenses, sure. But I'm not that person. That's not why I'm buying this lens. So I can't justify $1,000 for a lens at a focal length that I already have, even if I'm getting 2 more stops. Because I know I won't need those 2 stops all that often. What are your other options? Well, there's the 50mm f2 from Fuji. This lens is only $500. It's only $150 more than the Viltrox. But it's f2. It's not 1.4. And as we have seen, 1.4 is where you start to run into a little bit of problems with the Viltrox, but not so much at 2. So the Viltrox, if you never went below 2, is pretty much just as good as the Fuji 50 at 2. And it's $150 cheaper. Or $170 cheaper, right? Somewhere around there. So that's kind of a no-brainer, right? And it's also a 56mm instead of a 50mm. So you're going to get a little bit more bokeh even at f2 because you can zoom more. All right. So those two lenses are off. So now it comes down to the Viltrox. Do we want the Viltrox? Is it going to do the job for us? Okay. At 1.4, is it usable? Yes. Does it have some problems at 1.4? Yes. Can you get over those problems? Yes. I mean, the Fuji F100V, right? Where's my V? Here's the V. I shot with the F before this, and I shot with the S before that. And the F compared to this, the V, when it comes to focusing at 2.0, is night and day. This is so much sharper than the F. That's okay though, because I had the F and I adored it and I loved it and I used it all the time. And there are a ton of people who use the F to this day. There are people who actually prefer the F's slightly blurry focus at 2.0 versus the tack sharp of the V. So can you live with it at 1.4? Sure you can. Partly because I don't think I'm going to be shooting a lot of super close-ups with the 1.4. I don't think that 1.4 works really well for portrait stuff because I think it's just too shallow. And I might use it for some close-up work like rings and stuff at weddings. I might not. 2.8 might be enough for me. We'll see. I'm really going to have to put that into a practical use before I can make the decision. So 1.4, although not as great as I would like it to be, it's good enough. And 2.0 is super. 2.0 is super. And you can't deny the fact that getting an extra stop at 2.0 and getting an extra 2 stops at 2.8 definitely is something handy to have in your back pocket when you're working on location or you're doing night photography or whatever you may be doing. Being able to shoot someone by candlelight at 1.4 and have your ISO be 2 stops lower than it would be if you were using your 2.8 lens, that's huge. And it's certainly worth $330. So the final verdict is, yes, this stays in my kit. Because even though people love to say, if price is a factor, yeah, price is a factor. And the bottom line is the value of being able to get 1.4 for $330 cannot be discounted or overlooked. So much so that don't be surprised when a month from now, I'm on here doing a review of their 35mm equivalent lens as well. Because I'm going to start thinking, you know, taking a shot of the room at a wedding without having to use any flash and being able to get a stop or 2 stops, you know, wider and not have that grain in the walls. That's something I might want. And I can do that for less than $400. Yeah, Viltrox is really onto something. Good build quality. Optics are pretty strong. Not as strong at 1.4 as we'd like them to be, but I know this is a terrible thing to say. What do you expect for $330? It's not going to be a $2,000 optic. But man, for $330, it's a great optic. It really is. All right, that's it. Listen, leave a comment. Talk to me. Tell me if you've got this lens. Tell me if you got rid of this lens. I'd really like to know if you had this lens and then you decided it wasn't worth it. That's what I'd like to hear about as well. Leave some comments and be sure and look in the description and you will find links to everything, including this lens that I carry, and you can help support this channel if you use one of those links to purchase. I'll see you next time.